Well, good afternoon, Facebook. I want to welcome you to the Monday, September 22nd edition of Conversations from St. John Lutheran Church here in Luxembourg, Wisconsin. And we're going to be talking about two different things today. On the one hand, projection, and secondly, labeling. We talked about some different things. This is our third conversation, and the idea behind this is to try to increase dialogue, actual, casual dialogue between different groups of people. Because one of the struggles that we've developed as a society, is we can't just talk about things. We can't, or we choose not to, actually carry on a debate where people's opinions can change. We want to argue. That's what we want to do as a society. We want to fight then, because we get mad that we can't win the argument. But in reality, nobody's winning any arguments, because all that people are doing is basically putting walls up between themselves. Okay. And the projection and labeling are two of the tools that people are using, whether we realize it or not, to build these walls. Okay. So let's dive into what projection and labeling are. Okay. So projection. Basically, I want you to remember in this picture, psychological projection is a little bit different than what I'm talking about. But in the picture, what I really want to get at is this pointing idea. Okay. Projection is when a person accuses another person of the very thing that they're doing. So how do we counteract this? One of the underlying the pinnings, if you will, the foundations of conversations happening is that people have to be willing to call a thing what the thing is. Okay. You can't call something that it's not without the possibility of disagreement. So, easy example. Okay. If I was a politician and I want to pass a bill that is going to get rid of free speech, okay, use that idea. It's going to basically eliminate people's ability to go on to forums, online forums, and say whatever they want within reason, without getting arrested. But let's say I call that bill again. Its purpose is to rein in or police public speech and public discourse. But let's say I call that bill the Freedom of Speech Online Act. Well, I've just projected something onto this. Why? Because now anybody who attacks this with this title, anybody who attacks this is going to be supposedly against free speech, even though what I'm doing is against free speech. Okay. And if that doesn't work, okay, that's one of the tools, again, that builds barriers between conversations. If that doesn't work, the next step after projection is to label somebody. So I'll try to give you a picture of labeling, okay? You label somebody. If somebody's saying something that you don't like, if somebody's calling a thing what it actually is, calling out the projection that has been put on something, well, then let's label that. We saw this, for instance, all the time in any type of debates in our Congress. People are calling each other names. What are these names? Well, racist, xenophobic, misogynistic. On the flip side, liberal, Marxist, communist. Okay, we label, and we label quickly. Now, if the label fits, that's different. But if the label doesn't fit, the thought, though, today is if I just say it enough times, it'll stick. Well, that's actually propaganda. That's the whole idea of what happened throughout history. Anytime people were trying to control public thought, they used propaganda. They indoctrinated. They said something enough times that people just believed it. We can see this, for instance, when it comes to how could, for instance, sadly, and I pray this never happens again, but sadly, how could the German people be convinced that the Jewish people in their midst, many of whom lived in their midst for generations upon generations, how could they be convinced that they weren't human beings? And it wasn't just the Jewish people, the Hebrew people. It was also Slavic people and other people from Eastern Europe, people with big foreheads. How could the Nazis convince them of this? How could there's a great movie, and I can't remember the name off the top of my head right now, but in the movie, the main character, who is a Jewish person in a um, concentration camp, he keeps asking the doctor that he works with, what quacks like a duck, walks like a duck, has wings like a duck, but it's not a duck. And the German doctor just it was absolutely driving him nuts. He kept guessing, and he was guessing wrong. Well, of course, the answer is it is a duck. How do we combat labeling? Well, same thing. We call a thing what it is. And we have to be able to do that rationally. We have to be able to show without trying to, and again, like we talked about last week, hyperbole, without throwing out all these gross examples, gross meaning just out of proportion examples, hyperbolic examples. Keep it calm, keep it to the point. If somebody calls me racist, why am I racist? How is an opinion, when I work with anybody, when I don't look at somebody based on their outward appearance, I don't even look at them based on their faith. I'm a Lutheran pastor, Lutheran Christian pastor, but I'll work with anybody. I could care less what a person identifies about themselves. But to be called racist because of something I might say, when it's maybe taken out of context, or when it's being treated in a way that it's being said to say something that it doesn't actually say, that's projection and labeling. That's the use of hyperbole. And if we want to stop that as a people, we need to understand, instead of pointing it out with everybody else, the projection picture I had, we got to start here. Where do I do this? In what places do I project my fears, my struggles onto other people, and start correcting it here? Where are the places I label people, and start addressing it here? Because if we're all willing to take that first step, let that first step be look at ourselves, guess what? It's going to help us when we're trying to actually have conversations with other people. It's going to help us to understand what's going on in us and control ourselves and keep ourselves calm and our tone very light, and not blow things out of proportion, become hyperbolic. Instead, call a thing what it is. All right, just my thoughts on Monday. Guys, have a great rest of your week.